So it's a pleasure to be speaking to you this afternoon. My name is Jelena Aleksic. I'm the founder and CEO of GeneAdvisor, which is an online ordering platform for clinical genetic testing. And what I'm going to be talking to you about is advances in genomics and some of the ways in which this is transforming biomedical sciences and diagnostic medicine today. So there's a real revolution happening in healthcare right now. Back when the first human genome was sequenced, it took 13 years and $3 billion to do it. And it was a really massive international collaboration. It was really difficult to do. But actually, since then, there's been a massive technological advance in DNA sequencing. And as you can tell, the price of DNA sequencing has actually been dropping much faster than Moore's law. We've gotten to a point where we've gone from these 13 years and 3 billion to a point where we can sequence a human genome within only a couple of days, sometimes even a couple of hours, and the price is under $1,000. So it's really fantastic, and it's reached a point where it's cheap enough that we can start deploying this technology really widely in healthcare. And there are some fantastic potential use areas for this. So rare diseases are one of the areas where genomics can have a huge impact on diagnostics. So to give you a little bit of background, so firstly, rare diseases are, despite the name, not rare as such. Each individual rare disease is rare, but collectively they affect a lot of people. There are about 8,000 rare diseases in total, and they affect 350 million people worldwide. So they're really severe, they usually occur in childhood, and they're very tricky to diagnose. So because each doctor will have only seen each particular rare disease maybe once or twice in their careers, if at all, it means that the standard diagnostic process in medicine doesn't work very well for this area. So what often happens to these patients is that they get bounced from doctor to doctor, and misdiagnosis is a real problem. But using genomics, the great thing is that actually rare diseases are really genetically simple. So there's this difference between common diseases that usually involve thousands of genes interacting. So for example, cardiovascular disease has so many different interactions. But when it comes to rare diseases, it's actually, they're usually single gene mutations, which makes them very easy to diagnose using genomics approaches. Because rather than basing the diagnosis just on symptoms alone, which can be very similar between different diseases, what you can do is scan through thousands of genes at once, and you can check for thousands of diseases and find a match. And it really speeds up the process. So about 90% of rare diseases are genetic, and we can diagnose them in this way. So that's one fantastic area where this technology has been really developing a lot. Another area where it's really promising is in customizing cancer treatment. So cancer is also a genetic disease where the regulation of a cell has gone really wrong and the cells are multiplying at a fast pace. But there are many different genetic reasons why this can happen. And it used to be that you have breast cancer and it's one disease. But what we're actually realizing over time is that different cancers are essentially lots of different rare diseases. So now we don't just think about breast cancer. There are a lot of different subtypes. And by sequencing the cancer itself and looking through exactly what genetic mutation made it happen in the first place, we can customize treatment and make it much more effective than just a general treatment would be. So there's a real impact in this area. Also in precision medicine, so this is applicable to cancer with customizing treatments, but also to other diseases. So for example, if somebody has cardiovascular disease, on average, those patients take 5 different medicines until settling on the medicine that works for them. So it's a huge amount of time, and it has a real impact on patient health, on healthcare spending. Now, imagine if we could use this technology to customize this drug response straight away. So we sequence each patient, and we see what drug would work for them. And this is something that's becoming possible right now. And finally, prenatal screening has developed hugely in the last couple of years. So it used to be that if you had an at-risk pregnancy, the only way to test whether the baby had a genetic mutation or not was to do amniocentesis. And this is quite a risky procedure. There's a 1 in 20 chance of miscarriage. There's a real risk associated with it. But then a couple of years ago, scientists found something really cool, which was that when a woman is pregnant, actually the baby cells travel all the way through the woman's body. So they're present in the blood. There's even kind of baby cells that end up in your brain and things like this. So what we can actually do is just take a blood sample, sequence it, and then pick up on the baby cells within the blood sample, which makes it non-invasive. We can pick up on all the same genetic mutations that you could do with amniocentesis. But it can just be applied so much more widely because it doesn't have the same risks associated with it. So there's some really fantastic technologies appearing in this area. Now, to tell you a little bit about how this looks in the UK and what's been happening. So firstly, so good news for everybody living in this country. The UK has some of the best genetic testing labs in the world, so that's brilliant. So there are 23 different NHS regional genetic centres. And there's some of the world-leading labs in these areas. And they actually each have a specialty, so they're not necessarily interchangeable. But for example, the lab in Cambridge does this kind of rare disease diagnostics that I was talking about. There's a lab in Birmingham that does this kind of cancer testing that customizes treatment. So they have years of experience in research in particular areas and really fantastic tests developed with that. There were also a couple of really exciting research projects recently. So DDD, Deciphering Developmental Disorders, was a research project in Cambridge that recently concluded. And what they did was they recruited a cohort of 12,000 undiagnosed children and did a whole bunch of genomics tests to try and get them a diagnosis. And for about a third of them, they were successful. And they could give these children diagnosis, even though before they'd gone through so many different diagnostic procedures, and finally they could do it with genomics. And there's also a huge benefit in getting this kind of very precise molecular diagnosis. Because before we would lump really large populations of patients together. So for example, if a child has developmental delay, that can be for all sorts of reasons, but previously we couldn't diagnose it very precisely. But now we can pinpoint the exact gene, and we can really study the molecular basis of that and why it's happening and how we might be able to cure it. Now, off the back of the DDD project, there's a massive project happening right now. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it, the 100,000 Genomes Project. So we're in the middle of it, it's funded by the government, and it's focusing on these two areas of cancer and rare diseases. So the UK is really at the forefront of some of these technologies. Now, despite this, if you're a patient going through the system, early access to tests still remains an issue. So, as I mentioned before, rare diseases collectively aren't rare. So 1 in 17 people in the world will suffer from a rare disease at some point in their lives. So worldwide, that's 350 million people. But despite this, in the UK, it still takes an average of 6 years and visits to 8 doctors to get the right diagnosis. So this process of being bounced from doctor to doctor is still happening, despite the fact that we have these genetic tests and we could be diagnosing these patients much faster. So this really bothered me when I first found out about it. So at the time, I was working as a scientist, I was researching a rare disease, and I was using all this amazing technology in the lab. And it was a real shock to find out that while we have this technology, it's really not reaching patients, and we haven't really cracked this problem of access. So I wanted to find out why this was. So I went to speak to a whole bunch of different doctors around Europe, and it was interesting. Even though we have fantastic labs who can perform amazing testing in this area, doctors still encounter barriers accessing these tests. So genetic testing is quite specialized. And so firstly, there are a lot of labs doing testing, but the information about the tests they provide isn't necessarily online. Often they come up with new tests even a couple of times a week, but the websites that this information is on aren't updated very often because the labs are very busy. So maybe once a year they're updated. A lot of the tests aren't online anywhere, which meant that actually all of these doctors across Europe were wasting about a week per year per doctor, kind of phoning up different labs and asking basic things like, what tests do you do? How much does it cost? Do you still do this? Has the test changed from last year? And so with GeneAdvisor, we really wanted to change this. So our vision is to build the online marketplace for genomic medicine. So what we're creating is a single online hub where doctors can come and find all genomic medicine related resources in one place. So they can come to the website, they can search through available tests from different laboratories, they can order the tests, and also put in patient referral information online. So we're digitizing a lot of processes that are currently done entirely on paper. So we're kind of in the middle as a broker. What we do is put doctors in touch with clinical labs that can perform the testing. So we have a searchable test catalog, all these standard e-commerce things that are quite normal in industry but are quite radical in healthcare when you first implement them. And we also have detailed quality metrics about the tests. And you can see the website. We went live in February, so it's now live at geneadvisor.com. And we've been working closely with NHS labs in developing this, and GeneAdvisor streamlines the lab workflow. So this is really important because even though we have these amazing technological advances, we kind of have to be aware that actually healthcare budgets are shrinking. So whatever we're doing has to be cost efficient and really work with the system and reduce their costs. So what we've done is we co-developed our system with Adam Brooks Hospital in Cambridge, and what we tried to do was to work with them very closely, figure out their current workflow, and see where we could digitize and automate things so that they could do their work faster and they could focus on delivering these life-saving tests instead of doing a lot of unnecessary kind of manual admin. And finally, we really focus on high-quality clinical-grade tests. So I don't know how many of you in the audience are familiar with 23andMe? Yeah, a few, yeah. So basically, 23andMe is a company that does straight-to-consumer testing. It's quite a cheap test. It's good fun. Like, if you haven't tried it, it's very engaging. But it's not a clinical-grade test. So if you come to your doctor with a test like this, usually the first thing they would say is, okay, let's run a clinical test and then confirm that this is actually the case. So we don't focus so much on the consumer end of it. Instead, we focus on really high-quality, gold-standard clinical testing. And what we've also tried to build up on the site is really detailed quality information so that if a doctor comes to our website, they have all the necessary information to choose a test between different tests in different laboratories. So what's the coverage? How good is this test for this particular disease? What kind of lab is it? How much experience do they have in this area? Are they doing active research in this area? So we try and summarize a lot of quality metrics into quite a kind of simple set of quality badges in order to make sure the doctors can quickly skim through this information and find out which tests are most relevant. And as I said, the website's gone live and we're now rolling it out to other labs, both in the UK and in Europe. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be around for the rest of the day and I'm very happy to talk to you, or please do get in touch. Thank you.